In the span of a single decade, over $4 billion in public money was funneled into the rapid construction of penal facilities across the United States. Yet documented evidence reveals that nearly a third of these new structures reported critical infrastructure anomalies within their first 5 years of operation. We are looking at a landscape where concrete crumbles prematurely, security doors fail to latch, and ventilation systems pump toxic mold into locked cells. This is not the result of mere incompetence or accidental oversight. The architecture of modern incarceration has been quietly hijacked by the private prison industrial complex, a vast interconnected network of corporations and government agencies collaborating to build and manage penal facilities primarily for profit rather than rehabilitation or public safety. Within this system, the physical structures themselves are weaponized against the budgets of municipalities and the lives of those trapped inside. The blueprint for these facilities is drawn with a singular, overriding directive to maximize corporate margins at the absolute expense of structural integrity. The mechanics of this exploitation begin in the bidding rooms, where massive construction conglomerates secure lucrative government contracts by drastically underbidding their competitors. They present proposals that appear to save millions in upfront public spending, but experts contend that these artificially low bids are entirely reliant on a premeditated strategy of cutting corners. Corporations routinely substitute high-grade steel for cheaper alloys, thin out concrete pours, and bypass essential geotechnical surveys that ensure a building's foundation is actually stable. The financial exploitation deepens once the ink dries on the contract and the ground is broken through a labyrinth of subcontractors and shell companies. The primary developers siphon off the promised construction funds, leaving a fraction of the budget for the actual physical labor and materials. Every dollar shaved off the cost of a fire suppression system or a reinforced perimeter wall translates directly into shareholder dividends. The resulting structures are essentially hollow monuments to corporate greed, waiting for the inevitable stress fractures to appear. Those stress fractures manifest as immediate, terrifying dangers for the people living and working inside these facilities. In prisons across the Sun Belt, roofs have literally caved in under the weight of moderate rainfall because the structural supports were spaced too far apart to meet basic safety codes. Inmates and correctional officers alike are forced to navigate environments where failing electrical grids spark routine fires and where the fundamental promise of physical security is shattered by doors that can be kicked off their hinges. You might wonder how such blatantly flawed designs are ever approved by state authorities in the first place. The answer lies in aggressive lobbying, the systematic act of attempting to influence business and government leaders to create legislation or conduct an activity that will help a particular organization. Construction firms pour millions into political action committees, targeting the campaigns of local sheriffs, state representatives, and governors. This financial leverage effectively neutralizes the regulatory bodies that are supposed to rigorously vet these massive public works projects. This era of compromised infrastructure was born from a pivotal shift in the 1990s, when the political demand to look tough on crime collided with a push for massive government privatization. The resulting legislation essentially outsourced the architectural oversight of the carceral state, the comprehensive network of institutions, policies, and practices that rely on policing, surveillance, and imprisonment to manage social issues. By handing the keys to private developers, the government voluntarily relinquished its ability to demand rigorous, independent safety inspections. The shadow of those early deals still stretches across state legislatures today, manifesting in a culture of systemic denial and cover-ups. When structural anomalies are detected during the building phase, they are frequently buried under layers of corporate non-disclosure agreements and falsified inspection reports. Whistleblowers who attempt to flag substandard welding or improper plumbing installations are routinely silenced, transferred, or fired. The objective is simply to push the project past the final municipal sign-off, transferring the liability from the builder to the state as quickly as possible. Once the facility is officially handed over, a profound accountability gap immediately emerges. The contracts are intentionally drafted with convoluted liability clauses that shield the original architects and builders from lawsuits when the buildings inevitably begin to fall apart. If a poorly installed ventilation system leads to a deadly outbreak of respiratory illness, the corporation points to a subcontractor, who points to a supplier who has conveniently filed for bankruptcy, leaving the victims with no legal recourse. Consequently, the staggering taxpayer costs of these dangerous conditions are entirely socialized, draining public resources. When a newly minted U.S. prison requires a $50 million emergency retrofit to reinforce a sinking foundation, the corporation that built it does not foot the bill. Instead, state governments are forced to divert funds from education, healthcare, and community infrastructure to bail out a collapsing penal facility. The public essentially pays twice, once for the fraudulent construction, and again for the perpetual, desperate repairs. The physiological and psychological toll of inhabiting these decaying structures profoundly impacts recidivism, the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend and return to the prison system. Living in a state of constant environmental hazard, where raw sewage backs up into cells and extreme temperatures are entirely unregulated, strips away basic human dignity. Experts contend that surviving in such physically hostile environments drastically undermines any rehabilitative programming, virtually guaranteeing that individuals will return to society more traumatized than when they entered. According to recent reports from civil rights organizations, the backlog of deferred maintenance in state and federal prisons now exceeds $13.8 billion nationwide. This astronomical figure is not merely a reflection of aging buildings slowly succumbing to time. It is a direct ledger of corporate fraud. A significant portion of this debt represents the cost of fixing brand new facilities that were fundamentally broken on the day they opened. The data paints a clear picture of a system designed to fail physically so it can succeed financially. To maintain this lucrative grift, the corporations involved frequently engage in elaborate corporate shell games to obscure their track record. When a specific construction firm becomes too toxic due to a string of high-profile structural collapses, the parent company simply dissolves the entity and reorganizes under a new name. This corporate shape-shifting allows them to bid on new state contracts with a seemingly clean record, entirely evading the consequences of their past dangerous negligence and continuing to build unsafe environments. The revolving door between these shape-shifting corporations and the government agencies that hire them ensures the cycle continues uninterrupted. Former directors of state departments of correction frequently resign, only to immediately accept highly compensated executive positions within the very construction firms they previously oversaw. This incestuous relationship guarantees that future bids are evaluated not on the merit of safety or longevity, but on the strength of personal connections and unspoken financial quid pro quos. The lingering effects of this regulatory capture are evident in the widespread adoption of design-build contracts across the justice system. These agreements allow a single corporate entity to control both the architectural design and the physical construction of a prison, eliminating vital oversight. By removing the traditional separation of powers between the architect who designs for safety and the builder who constructs for cost, the state removes the most critical check and balance in the commercial construction industry. Without an independent architect to actively verify the work, the builder is completely free to quietly alter the blueprints mid-construction to save money. Documented evidence reveals instances where high-security glass was secretly swapped for standard commercial panes, and where critical reinforced rebar was entirely omitted from cell block walls. These lethal modifications are hidden behind fresh coats of institutional paint, waiting for a crisis to expose the fatal weaknesses woven into the building's hidden fabric. Even when these lethal modifications are discovered after a riot or an escape, state attorneys general rarely pursue criminal fraud charges against the corporate executives involved. The legal battles are instead fought in civil courts, where corporations utilize armies of defense attorneys to drag proceedings out for decades. The strategy is pure financial attrition, designed to exhaust the state's legal budget until they agree to a meager settlement that amounts to a fraction of the original stolen funds. The final, perhaps most cynical layer of this exploitation is the secondary market of facility maintenance and emergency repair. In a staggering display of audacity, the very corporations that deliberately built these failing structures often secure the subsequent contracts to maintain them. They create a perpetual revenue stream by charging the state exorbitant hourly rates, to fix the exact plumbing and electrical systems they intentionally sabotaged through cheap installation years prior, double-dipping into the public treasury. The human cost of this perpetual repair cycle falls squarely on the incarcerated, who are subjected to endless lockdowns and disruptions while work crews patch up the latest structural failure. These endless renovations create an environment of perpetual chaos and danger, exacerbating tensions and leading to increased violence among the population. The physical instability of the building directly translates into the psychological instability of the people it holds, creating a pressure cooker of anxiety and unrest. Sociologists and architectural historians observe that the physical state of a society's prisons serves as a profound reflection of its core ethical values. When a nation permits its carceral infrastructure to be constructed as disposable, profit-generating commodities, it implicitly signals that the lives contained within those walls are equally disposable. The crumbling concrete and failing locks are not just engineering errors, they are the physical manifestation of a society that has outsourced its moral obligations to the lowest corporate bidder. This modern crisis of unsafe prison construction is deeply rooted in the historical exploitation of incarcerated labor and bodies for financial gain. Just as the convict lease system of the 19th century prioritized industrial output over human survival, the modern construction grift prioritizes shareholder value over structural integrity. The mechanisms have evolved from brutal chain gangs to sophisticated corporate contracts, but the underlying ethos of extracting wealth from the captive and the marginalized remains chillingly consistent throughout American history. Recent audits of penal infrastructure across 12 states confirm the devastating scale of this historical continuity and modern corruption. The audits found that facilities built by private contractors in the last 20 years experience critical infrastructure failures at a rate 3 times higher than those built by state-managed public works departments in the mid-20th century. We are fundamentally regressing in our ability to build safe, enduring public institutions, and this regression is entirely by corporate design. The architecture of failure is so deeply embedded in the business model that it can no longer be viewed as an anomaly. It is the standard operating procedure for the industry. These corporations do not view a collapsed roof or a shattered security door as a failure of their product or a breach of public trust. In the cold calculus of the boardroom, these events are merely the acceptable, externalized costs of doing business, comfortably shifted onto the shoulders of taxpayers. Ultimately, the story of how corrupt deals build unsafe U.S. prisons is a harrowing testament to the dangers of unchecked corporate power within the justice system. The staggering financial costs and the profound human suffering are the direct yields of a system that values lucrative contracts over human life and public accountability. As long as the foundations of these institutions are poured with the concrete of corporate greed, the walls will inevitably continue to crack, leaving us to confront the true cost of our carceral architecture.